Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 5, Episode 6 of The Green Agenda. First and foremost, per usual, we would like to say a thank you to our partners and sponsors, the Environmental Defense Fund and the Climate Action Campaign. Tonight's episode will focus on food sovereignty and urban agriculture. Today, we're sitting down with Tambra to discuss the importance of food justice and urban farming initiatives in Black neighborhoods as a means of combating food deserts and promoting health. For this episode of The Green Agenda, we are joined, as I said, by Ms. Tambra Raye Stevenson, who is the founder of WANDA, which stands for Women Advancing Dietetics and Nutrition. So with that, is there anything you would like our audience to know before we get started? I'm excited. This is something
let's jump into it.
We'll jump right in. All right. So, Tambra, first, could you tell us a little bit about your professional journey and how you became the Queen of Food, Nutrition, and Health?
What an honor, since there are no kings around here or queens. I would say that my journey really began just with that curiosity as a kid in Oklahoma, wanting to solve the problem of diabetes and other chronic conditions that not only impact my family, but so many in our community, and realizing that being a physician is not the only path to making an impact when it comes to improving health outcomes. And so it wasn't until really being a college student at Oklahoma State University that a classmate told me about the field of nutrition. I complained that we didn't have biology department as a bio major, pre-med, and I didn't look back once I learned nutrition had funding, because if there's money, Tambra will talk.
I'm going. I'm going.
You know what I'm saying? Especially as a first gen, there's no trust fund babies here. And so we got to pay these college tuitions. So with that, I changed majors to nutrition, and I joined the department, saw that it's not just Betty Crocker that most people think about nutrition, but it's actually a real science and research is being conducted. And that's what helped pay the bills. And I lived pretty good. Didn't have to do plasma or eat ramen noodles like my other classmates. And so with that, I went on to study public health after being an intern at Harvard, and learned that my teammates on the research team, some were in nutrition communications, learned being at the public health school, I learned that that was the path that I was really interested in. So I just came back to Boston, went to grad school at Tufts Med, and just studied health comm, and just realizing my love of art and science can live and reside in the same space, which was really understanding how the power of media and storytelling and changing behavior was really important. That it's not enough just to do the research, but the research has to be translated into bite-sized information that people can receive and make impact. And so from there, it was, realizing who had the most power, the government. And so coming to Health and Human Services right after Tufts just made sense of who was funding the largest health campaigns across the country. And so being there was eye-opening. I got to see one class I took at Tufts was called Public Health Policy and Politics, and realizing what did that really mean. Most people in health, you would think apolitical, but once you come to GC, that's a game changer.
Nothing is apolitical.
It is not.
DC.
Health is very much political, just as much as food. And so realizing that very quickly, working under, at the time, the Bush administration, I realized it was an opportunity to just not just be the change I wanted to see within an agency, but realizing affecting change can happen outside. But having that institutional knowledge is vitally important in knowing how to navigate these political streets. And so I worked at several federal agencies in the mayor's office before I decided to create WANDA. But spending that time, I would say as an extension agent, I really appreciated that time because it meant being in community. I was at a community health program at Tufts, and so I learned it's kind of like being a pharma sales rep, when you're pounding the pavement in the streets. But in this case, educating the community around nutrition, realizing it's not enough just to be logical in your education, but being able to understand where to meet people where they are emotionally when it comes to food, and how to change the hearts as much as the mind is very important. And so that foundation was important in order to even launch WANDA. And I could go on about the international, side of working in NGOs, but all of that together, the best way I can describe it is like those pearls that you collect of wisdom over time help to build the pearl necklace that you'll wear in the end that will be a reflection of all your lived experiences together.
That's beautiful. I'm curious, one of the things that you touched on as you were talking about your experience and this path and this journey here is how deeply intertwined it was with your personal experience, and that it also the experience of your close family, and then also as you're preparing to educate people and translate the information that you've learned in some ways through your personal experience and also through institutionalized education, how you can translate and communicate that, especially because food is so deeply cultural.
Yes.
And when you talk, especially in many low income marginalized communities of color, right? We think about, or I think about even within my family, like, some of our recipes, right? Like the things that, have generationally, scientifically have been linked to certain adverse health outcomes, right? But like, this is grandma's recipe, right? This is what we've eaten for a very long time. And so I appreciate, I'm curious about how you step into those conversations, right? Because food is so deeply personal, because this is what my mama fed me, and this is what my mama's mama fed me, and this is this is what we can afford, right? Because that also becomes a part of the conversation. Yeah. What have you learned to how you approach those conversations?
Yeah, it's like relationships. It's complicated, but I will say in unpacking that, it's a combination of one, understanding that coming from the heart, to me, is the way in which I communicate. It's very, very important. And I say this because if you look at one colleague's book, Food Power Politics by Bobby Smith, he's out of UIC, and he writes about Greenwood, Mississippi, and about how the White Citizens Council used food as a means to weaponize and politicize when it came to Black sharecroppers who had access to, try to have access to the Federal Food Commodities Program, but they blocked it, saying for budgetary reasons. And this is at a time when industrial agriculture was shifting how we saw the agricultural economy, that was no longer just powered by humans, but now by machines. And so that left a lot of folks without jobs. And if you have no job, you cannot feed yourself. And so when we think about the modern day federal food stamps program, that was not something that Fannie Lou Hamer, Marion Wright, before she became Wright Edelman at the time, were not advocating for. The complete opposite. It was actually those who were the private grocery store owners who benefited from the federal food stamps program. And many people may not know that history, and that's why history is so important to understand that. The other part is that we're eating a colonized cuisine. And so when we think about the foods in which that has gotten our generations over time this far, it's through the means of survival and resilience. And it's through culinary creativity that we've been able to turn something that was rooted in pain into food to feed our families. And I think for those, how understanding our value systems and reshaping and reshifting the way we think about our relationship to food has to be called to question. I'm writing an essay right now in preparation for our Sisterhood Supper coming up here in D.C., and we use the means of being on the farm, reconnecting to the land, and bringing Black chefs together and women, and celebrating the impact they've done in the food system as a means to re-engage a conversation and introduce foods in a way that can be healthy and honoring our heritage at the same time. But as someone who has not only supported federal programs, but also been a recipient of them as well, I would like to believe that we have the opportunity to reimagine how we think about food. And and coming from recently the Menu of Change Summit at Culinary Institute of America, and seeing how can we change menus in a way that honor the planet, since the theme was planetary health, but at the same time honor our heritage. This is the opportunity in front of us right now. And I would say that, unfortunately, we have not had a relationship to food, and it has not been introduced to us as a nation in a way that has been honoring not only our ancestors, but honoring our ability to celebrate life and health. And right now, we've all been in survival mode in how we relate to food. And that needs to change.
That is so. I'm gonna do my best to stick to the script, but I think it's something that I took a class my freshman year of college at Spelman called contemplative practices, and one of the things that we had a conversation about, it was actually a class that was recommended to me by my honors academic dean, and I remember being like, girl, why? Like, I'm trying to get all of my, I'm trying to get my prereqs out of the way.
Were you in the food studies program?
I was not. I was I was a political science student. But I remember being like, why? Like, why is this important? Like, why does this matter? And our Professor Goler, I'll never forget her. I had her my freshman year, and it was such an important experience because she forced us to slow down. In such a time, we were in the middle of the pandemic. It was our freshman year of college. We were all young, striving Black women, like on the way to what we feel like is, on the way to a great future ahead, right? And one of the things that we spoke about in that class was mindful eating. And it was like, again, my energy toward the curriculum in the very beginning was not reflective of the value that it had. But I just found what I found so profound about that conversation and the lessons that we had is we had real conversation about, like, how do you decide what you eat in a day? And at that time, a lot of it was like, what is available, what is fast, and what is going to satiate whatever craving I'm having at this given moment.
That's your value systems.
Exactly. And so it was, we talked about like how we select what we eat, and then we talked about how we, like, what our relationship was with food once we began to eat. So like, how are you marking your pace with which you eat? And I'm like, to get done, usually I'm eating and fill in the blank, eating and working, eating and, on social media, eating and having conversation, eating and she actually like had us participate in a practice where we ate by ourselves. Like we literally just ate, and we ate at a certain pace. Like, I can't remember if she assigned a certain amount of chews or she assigned a certain amount of time, and like reflecting on what we were eating. And to your point, it just shows how easy it is within a society where eating is just like, it's just a requirement it's a box we check off throughout the day, especially when you're in survival mode, right? When you're living through a pandemic, when you're living not even knowing where your next meal is coming from, when you're living in circumstances where you just have to grab a meal between one thing and the next, right? It absolutely, what you eat is a reflection of your value system, and our value system has been so fractured, and it's not something that you would be thoughtful of unless, or that I was thoughtful of. I'll speak for myself in saying, until I was prompted.
Most definitely.
And even still, I struggle.
No, I mean, I'm actually glad you brought up Spelman. I've had the pleasure of speaking at the Food is Medicine Summit and just brought down to Atlanta and met some amazing alum that's come out of the program. Love Lundy is one who was a political science major. With a food studies on the side, exactly. And when I think about, young up and coming women leaders like her, the future is bright. And at the same time, I'm glad that you had that opportunity to be forced to really dive into food in that way, because the reality is we need food systems literacy just as much as financial literacy, because it's the basis of how we even thrive and live in this country. But unfortunately, because of capitalism being the basis of many of our values as a system and nation, it shapes our personal values, which is unfortunate, that we have to really reconsider how are we going to balance people, planet, profit. I remember being in grad school in Boston, being exposed to the social enterprise world, and realizing there are folks who are trying to shake up and reimagine how we think about capitalism and how we think about our systems. And I think that's the same way how I think we should be coming to the conversation of food and in our communities, that many of the Black political leaders and economic leaders, even at Harvard Business School, I remember when they came up with these Black agendas, I'm like, where's food and health? Like, how do you have an agenda for people and it's not rooted in the very reason why we were brought to this country? Make it make sense. And so I find that it's critically important that health, as much as the environment and food, they're all connected. You know, if the planet is not doing well, we're not doing well. It's a symbiotic relationship. And so that has to be a part of the conversation within our community. When I think about my 98-year-old grandma in Northeast Oklahoma City right now, who has LNG tanks, you know, just knocking at her door, and she has in her backyard like sinkholes, you know, present, and to know that for 70 years she's called that home on Standish Road, where she's raised her children, had her husbands, and I'm just like, yeah, she's been married 3 times and survived all of them. But the point is, she's been able to see and advocate for environmental issues in her own community as a nurse who understands the connection between health and environment. And we need more Rubies out there like my grandma.
Shout out Ruby too. It's such an amazing conversation. I'm gonna try to come back to the scripted questions because I know that these are good, you know. But I do want to make sure we cover this because some of our listeners may be new to this concept of food sovereignty, may be new to just what you're discussing in general.
Yeah,
these
sovereign nations almost feel like a concept and not a real thing right now.
Exactly. Look, we might just be confused about the definition of sovereignty in general, right? And so if you could share what that means to you and how it intersects with this fight for race and environmental justice in our communities.
In a nutshell, this is why in the UN Declaration of Human Rights you have a line about the right to food, and why for the last 2 years we've been championing at WANDA a food bill of rights, and had the pleasure of being with other human rights leaders getting to the White House to champion this. And within that, which you can go to foodbillofrights.org, we talk about food sovereignty in a way that is your ability to grow food, the ability to be educated about the food system, and also to have food with dignity and respect, but have access to land to where you can build a livelihood and have a sense of food freedom and economic power that comes from that, just as much as improving the health of your community and yourself within that. And so to simply have access to land, I mean, that's what the whole creation of the state of Oklahoma was about. You get your 2 stakes of land when the Great Land Run of 1889 happened, and you put that into the ground, and how many of our family members have been able to acquire hundreds of acres of land. But just like in the movie that'll come out soon, Sarah's Oil, about a young Black girl who, before there was Madam C.J. Walker, she became our first Black millionaire from the mineral rights, the oil and the land. And so the land that may appear to not be healthy and sustainable actually is rich with minerals and resources. And so that has been the funny backstory of many lands that were given to those of African descent in Oklahoma, that just our family, there were mineral rights, and so you have excavators who go and found that oil. And so when it comes to sovereignty over the land, is yes, for food, but it's also the ability to create a livelihood out of that land, whether it's from the minerals of it or the ability to grow on that land or to have a homestead. It can mean so many different things, but a sense of ownership is the most critical part of that. And so it's bred within my DNA, being a 5th generation Oklahoman, about this idea that anything I have, I want to own. I tell this to my children. I'm not renting anything. I experimented recently doing that, and I was like, never again. I own everything: my car, my home, my body, my life. When you think about, you've come from like ancestors of people who did not have full sovereignty over their bodily autonomy. It's something that will become a part of your value system that I refuse to ever be bought and bossed by anyone. I think Shirley Chisholm knew it best, but that is part of my DNA.
Yeah, I think something that's sticking out to me. I'm curious, right? Because you're obviously well educated in this sector, but for folks who are newly introduced, right? So to the concept, right? But then also in general to this idea of farming, of taking control of their diet, of taking control of the land and leaning into the symbiotic relationship that we have with the land and being able to take from and give back to the land and their communities. I'm thinking most specifically in urban communities, right? That have, these desolate concrete landscapes, right? And all of these, where it can sometimes be difficult to know where to start, right? And to identify, because there's so much that goes into tilling and caring for land, right? Like finding the right land and having the right soil and watering it in the correct ways and knowing the right, crops that you can, so what, insight can you offer for somebody who's maybe interested in these conversations, interested in taking control of their diet and even possibly supporting their communities to start a community garden or those kinds of things?
Most definitely. Well, one, as a bibliophile, I love a good book, and one I would recommend reading is Freedom Farmers by Monica White, who speaks of some of this. We have many case studies from Detroit food. I'm blanking out on the full complete name, but Maliki Kinney has been one of the key leaders in urban farming in Detroit, Michigan. I think about Chris Bradshaw here in D.C. With Dreaming Out Loud. But when you think about places like D.C. and even Detroit and others, most of the land is owned by the government. And so what helps is to have a champion in your legislature, whether it's at the city council level or the state level or the county level, to be able to believe in the importance of food sovereignty and honing and acquiring land. Now, it might be a deal where for $1 you have land for the next 100 years like they give corporations, but the idea is that the land should be given to people in order to grow food, knowing that food and nutrition security in this country is a huge problem. And that means being politically engaged and civically engaged. And most times, as I recently wrote a piece that will come out with Civil Eats around civic engagement and comparing Oklahoma to DC around like where you see a lack of civic engagement, you also see issues of food insecurity. And for me, that really is important about people shifting their mindsets from just simply being a foodie, but a food citizen, feeling that they have the agency and autonomy to fight for what is theirs. They pay taxes on land. You should have access to land. And not only that, have access to the technical assistance and also the education. And that means programs through USDA that feed right into your state agricultural departments, providing the grants and the procurement and technical assistance is important to engage. Leverage your extension agents who are there on the agriculture and nutrition side. Wherever there is a state university, there are the extension services to support community members as well. And understand that whether you choose to be engaged in this conversation, you're going to pay regardless. So you might as well get involved, build a coalition, find unity in the community, build that level of solidarity in order to affect change. But if you believe you have no change, then you will be left with the change in your pockets.
That's good. You have such little nuggets. So food apartheid, not food deserts, more accurately describes the systemic barriers to accessing healthy food in Black communities. Yeah. This is actually one of the first times that I've heard that phrase, food apartheid. So how can we reintroduce ancestral practices and leverage urban agriculture to dismantle the racist structures and promote food sovereignty? So you were just talking about some of the ways that we can work in solidarity and unity with one another to build the necessary networks and systems, but could you maybe start with what the difference is between a food apartheid and a food desert for
most definitely? It's no different than thinking about like holistic medicine versus allopathic medicine. So allopathic medicine looks at body parts. You have a specialist for your breasts, for your arm, for your face, that sort of thing. But when you think about food desert, that's what it is. It's a part of a system that is the food apartheid. The food apartheid is looking at the ecosystem of how we have fragmentation and intentional brokenness, similar to the concepts of redlining that's caused fragmentation in the housing system.
Yeah.
That's what we have when it comes to the food system. And so the best way to think about it is the intentional nutritional divestment, where you'll see food swamps like a plethora of corner stores, but yet all of it is like type B food, that branded B food, right? Things that you might not find maybe at the local Safeway, but you have at the corner store. Not only that, you don't have any community gardens. Not only that, where are your nutritionists in the community, your teaching kitchens? Where are the billboards that promote healthy food? It's mostly soda and chips, that sort of thing. So you have an intentional divestment of health and nutrition in a community that has played out into poor health comes over time. And so that is highly problematic, and it's no coincidence when you think about why you have diabetes and kidney issues in the community. Oh yeah, by the way, you'll also have a lot of dialysis centers, right? And so, and liquor stores, can't forget that part. So
Plenty of those.
So it's, in other words, we got more weeds than seeds in a community. Highly problematic. Not saying weeds are not edible, but how many are eating dandelions, right? So we rather eat the sunflower seeds. So that's how I would like to think about those two comparisons.
And so how do we introduce something important I'd love for you to touch on is the ancestral practices, because you talked about how a lot of what we our relationship with food is defined by colonialism, capitalism, right? These systems that are very separate from the cultures of food where many of us came from, right? Because many of us aren't really from America, which anywho is a whole nother conversation. I won't go there. But how do we return to and reconnect with some of the ancestral practices and ancestral the ancestral culture around food and recipes?
Yes. So I'll just start with one. It's about having a desire and intention within yourself, right? You have to make an active choice to say, I want to know, as Oprah says, whose I am. And when I think about when my father passed and we shared a love of both food and family history, of knowing where we come from, that was the legacy I wanted to build on in honoring him. Everyone will have a different way in which they honor, but I remember the episode that Oprah shared with a little child who his brother died of cancer, and she asked, how do you want to honor your brother? And so he came over to Cookies for Cancer business, right? And so he wanted to raise money for cancer research. And I don't think too many times when we have a loved one pass, we reflect and say, our grandmother who died from diabetes, how do I want to honor her? For me, I saw how my grandma ate. She had a lot of sweets. She had a sedentary lifestyle and smoking her cigarettes. Just a trifecta of a constellation of issues that were going to spar her into the chronic condition that she was living in, and ultimately died from those complications. And so for me, it's understanding that, pulling back the layers of our family history. What have we done? What can we do better? How do we reshape the next family reunion? Honor the ancestors, coming up with a family history cookbook. How do we gather the foods that have helped us sustain life over the time, and how do we fill in the gaps and remix those recipes? And so for those who don't have the pleasure of having those moments, through the work of WANDA, we've created our WANDA Academy. We've helped women to rethink and reimagine the recipes. Some never even owned a cookbook, which is almost astonishing, but at the same time, it's an opportunity to say, well, let us create our own sisterhood cookbook where we're remixing our own recipes that are reclaiming not only our food ways, restoring our health, but also returning to our roots. And those roots may differ for many people, which is why I encourage, do the DNA test, do the research, go back to the continent, reconnect. In reconnecting to my Fulani roots in Nigeria, going back to Kano, being able to start a scholarship to now support WANDA scholars there, who the first class will graduate with their degrees in nutrition next year, that I want to be there for their graduation. It comes full circle in becoming whole and complete and knowing who you are and your identity. So for those who are looking for a moment of belonging, I'm writing an essay now. My dissertation research at American is about belonging. But what I find is that this ability to find a place to belong, and food being an extension of that identity, brings a level of healness and wholeness that I don't know any doctor that can give you. And that's the part when it comes to holistic health we forget about. You can heal a physical disease, but there are spiritual elements of us that we may never have a label or prognosis or for, but a sense of belonging is not only foundational into how we identify ourselves, but it's how we sometimes honor and do the things that we do. Right now, we have a country where some people belong, some don't. We have families who have children who feel like they don't belong. What does that do to you over time? And so food becomes an extension. So when our African diasporan foods are not at the table with Mediterranean and Asian and Latino foods, are you saying that we don't belong? And so we have to reclaim that for ourselves and say, no matter what you say is invited to the table, we will make our own table and say, I belong. And WANDA, we belong, and you belong.
Yeah. First of all, you're so profound. I appreciate all of the guests that we come on, that we have on. But I so appreciate just your eloquence and the way that you connect ideas. And I just had to say that before we move forward. I want to point out or touch on, you talked about the generational aspect of trauma and the way that we internalize and carry with us certain
epigenetics.
Yes, you even thinking about generational diseases, right? Like, I talked about the recipes that we pass down, but also the diseases that pass through generations.
Yeah.
We've all had hypertension. We've all had diabetes. We all struggle with high blood pressure. We always, my grandma, and so I just think about and am thoughtful of the way in which learned helplessness can set in, right? This idea,
fatalism.
Yes, this idea that this is the way that it's always been and the way that it always will be, right? That I am, this is where I have to be, right? That there is nothing more beyond, and also embracing or addressing the difficulty of challenging what have become normalized experiences of suffering.
Most definitely.
Like amongst our communities, right? Like the normalized experience of suffering with disease, the normalized experience of suffering with turmoil and living with turmoil. So many people, folks, and I'll say Black women specifically, wear turmoil as a trophy, or carry it as a trophy. This was my struggle, and not that there's, to a certain extent, the resilience accompanied by a struggle is an honor, right? And also, we have to be very intentional about the way that we take on the struggle that comes with depression, that comes with marginalization, that comes with the intersectionality of all of these different experiences. And, you spoke about how you've studied public health. And so you've, I'm sure, recognized how easily these things compound, right? How easily environmental injustice compounds with racial injustice, compounds with food injustice, compounds with gender injustice, compounds with, right? And then before you know it, you have accepted and taken on so much that it begins to feel almost impossible that there is another reality, that another reality could even exist in this capitalistic, colonialistic society where everyone seems so dead set on making sure that communities of color feel as if they don't belong.
That's why faith matters. Diabetes may be in my family, but it doesn't have to be my destiny. And it's really important to honor and understand that. I was just on a call today, just talking to one of our team members just about food and culture and the psychology in our communities as a collective, and just thinking about how we process, the world and see our relationship to food, but we have to have an intentional conversation similar to the mindful meditation around I am worthy, I am deserving, I'm valuable enough to have all that God has created on this earth, that I am an extension of that greatness and my body deserves greatness within. That is a belief system that we have to acquire collectively and demand that. And so the next time you're at the church or you're at the next community event and they're serving things that look like it could be slop, call it what it is and just can we not get better caterers? I mean, literally, can we educate our chefs and caterers to have food that is sustainable and healthy for the community. The Good Food Purchasing Program is one thing that we adopted and championed within our DC Food Policy Council, like so many other food policy councils across this country. But it's just how do these core set of values become soaked into the soul of our community? It's not there on a collective, and it needs to be. And when we do, we will see the change in our health and in our attitudes and how we believe that we deserve. I find that as a community nutrition educator, I was not about talking the logics of vitamin D, C, E, and all of that. It was really about what are your values and how do you not believe that you deserve good food. This concept of some food is only for white folks versus black folks, even that shows a dichotomy that should not exist. And if there is this concept of some people have supposed healthy foods, does it have to be from a Western lens? And so challenge that, be willing to challenge, be a critical consumer and thinker and just being. And I find that there's a lot of opium being digested versus just don't drink the juice, people.
But that is work. I think that's a great part of what because it is important work, but it is work. And I think that's something that we culturally have to accept, right? That challenging what has become the norm and coming against it and, being willing to be in community spaces and say, can we change the menu?
Yeah.
Well, this is what we've always eaten, and that is a work, but it's a work.
And don't challenge the good food or the healthy food, but so much to unpack. But also, my brain just went to a moment where I created a culinary ministry in my parish, and the elder comes through the line and is like, what's that? I'm like, you wasn't, Miss Shirley, were you challenging the catfish and the fries last week? Because I know you didn't. So it's moments like that, just grinds my gears. But, I get it, especially if you have a food allergy. But the other part for the young folks, as someone who's raising children who challenge me, and it irks me sometimes, I do know as a parent that I hope you keep that same energy when it comes to challenging systems. And so that's the only, moment where I'm like, I'm going to let you slide, buddy, because I'm going to need you to keep that same energy.
I need you to have that. I need you to bring that for generations to come. Yes,
exactly.
I need that to be my legacy.
And I'm saying that for other parents who, just because you don't like a particular food doesn't mean that your child doesn't like you don't like carrots. Okay, the kid might let him eat the carrots, and I think that's also the extension of breaking that generational baggage, right? Understand that you represent almost like an immigrant mindset. When you think about kids who are firstborn Americans, you see that tension that happens in the household. I think it's no differently from those of us who've been here many generations, but now have that opportunity to get that college education or move on to that job. And so we also are having a shift social economically and consciously that sometimes may feel like we are leaving people behind because we're not honoring them and our food system or the food culture that we grew up in. And so even that can create a moment of like, I don't feel belong because I gave up chitlins, right? Like, but no, you're elevating, right? And so I think there's a component that even in our community, when there's levels of classism that happens, that also has to be acknowledged of like, how does that shape our food culture and regionally, right? You know, I grew up in the heartland, so our food culture is not going to be the same as low country or in mid-Atlantic. And so Jessica Harris just came out with a new book called Braided Heritage, and she talks about that unity that happens of intertwining African, indigenous, and European food culture and that make up America, and saying that we all belong. And I think that's also an element to this, is about understanding that we are an amalgamation of many different parts that make up not only who we are in our identity, but also as a community, and finding ways to embrace all parts of us and not just some of us.
Yes, I thought about, as you were talking about, you know, the new experience of healthy alternatives and, you know, experimenting with food. I remember I work in the summers. I support with Freedom Schools. It's actually the Children's Defense Fund Freedom Schools that was founded by Marian Wright Edelman. And we had this afternoon activity, which is when we bring in local vendors to expose you to different types of hobbies, extracurriculars, those kinds of things. And it was a food-based, a nutrition-based activity. And I remember they were bringing in different types of recipes and foods and those sorts of things. And they were having these conversations with the youth where they were like, you know, we are going to expose you to new tastes and new textures and new foods and these kinds of things that you may not have other experience. And they discouraged the use of the word like nasty or yucky or, you know, those kinds of things. These are young scholars, of course. And I remember there being afternoons, you know, that so they would redirect, like, what's a different way that you can say it? Like, I don't like this texture. I don't think this is for me, right?
Expand your vocabulary.
Yes, exactly. Precision of language, right? But that is something that, or they would even encourage them to take a second bite, right? That like, okay, if the first bite wasn't for you, to give it another chance, to give it another opportunity. And I think that is something that so many adults still don't have that skill necessarily to be able to address, like, okay, when maybe just this isn't for me in such a way that doesn't that doesn't take away from the value that it may add. You know, even understanding that sometimes food is for nutrition and not for taste per se. Not that nutritious food can't be tasty, right?
Right.
But there are certain things that are good for you
some
that may not be good to
pleasure.
You. You know, yes, right?
Most definitely. And I will say, like, don't blame the veggie, blame the cook. You know, just because you don't have cooking skills does not mean it can't be good. I'll give a classic example. I remember doing a food service management rotation at the Smithsonian American Indian Museum, and they simply chopped up some Brussels sprouts, sauteed that in some butter with a little bit of salt. They were great. Now, take that somewhere else, you know, who have not seen the bowl of Brussels sprouts has been burnt to a crisp? And you would think, like, I am not trying that again, right?
Yeah.
Or pie spinach, right? You see the cans. I grew up on a lot of cans. And so the canned spinach versus the bag of fresh spinach, total different tastes. And so that's where, when we talk about nutrition, it's not just the product, it's the processing and the preparation that matters, that ends up affecting the flavors. And so the beauty of those who do dive in and go to culinary school, or just like cooking and experimenting, like recently I was at the James Beard Award weekend, and so, you know, there's a lot of great food happening, tasting, you get full like a pig, and you're just like, let me detox for the next 48 hours. I had more caviar in a weekend than I had in my life.
That's so funny.
Yeah. And so for me, I think about those moments of like, is this the moment where you act picky? No, I'm diving in. I'm eating because I know I had $1,000 worth of food this weekend. I'm not skipping out on this opportunity because we can always eat like survivor mode any other time. I'm trying to eat like I'm thriving right about now.
Yes.
And so I think that is the mindset for folks to believe that you do deserve to have a life worth thriving for, and have food to reflect that. And if that means growing your own food in a windowsill, on a balcony, or in your backyard, then plant those seeds, because SNAPs pay for that too. So it means that it's not enough. It's not enough just to simply continue to eating the way we are, but have your food reflect your consciousness and let it both grow.
Yes, that's so good. I'm curious, on a less like deep note, who your favorite cooks are? Do you have like favorite cooks, favorite cookbooks, favorite like influencers?
I have a lot of books. And favorite cooks, that means I would have had to eaten their food. I would say if you're in DC, I always recommend Swahili Village. It's it's a taste of Kenya. If you like Swahili food, and it's consistent, it's flavorful, and it represents food that's not overly done, not fried, dyed, laid to the side, and so you can get your collard greens, you can get that coconut spinach, and you can get the salmon that's done right and broiled. And so that's what I would recommend if you're here in the DC area. For cookbooks is too many, and I'm a vibrational cook, so I tend to just make up things on the fly in the kitchen.
And is that where you started? So like in your youngest or earliest experiences in the kitchen, what was your introduction?
So I was that person who crocheted my own mama's kitchen sign, made my own menu. My sister was my dedicated customer. The top dishes of the day were any leftovers my mama made, and anything I made was basically some sandwiches. You either had a hot link or a bologna sandwich. So that was the menu of that time period. But it brought me full circle when I thought about going into nutrition, to say that food for me was not only an extension of home and love, but also creativity and art. And it is an art. It is a science. It is both. And that's the beauty of it. For people who are visual and physical, when we think about the kinesthetic learning, it does all of that. The head, the heart, the hand, like the 4-H, it goes all together. And so that's why for me, food is just a great opportunity to bring everyone together.
Okay. I'm looking down at my script because I'm like, we've gotten a little off, but I'm so excited.
We're zigging, we're zagging.
We're zagging, and I'm going to try to, I'm going to bring us back. I'm going to bring us back. So I am curious, because of everything going on with climate change and the way our environment is changing drastically, very, very quickly, right? And the way that it disproportionately impacts Black communities, which exacerbates the existing food insecurities. How can urban agriculture, and localized food systems build climate resistance in these communities? And what specific strategies would you recommend to be implemented to address issues like extreme heat, flooding, and soil contamination?
Wow. Well, obviously, support the organizations that are doing the work.
That'll do it. Yeah.
When you think about, again, the value system where you choose to tithe and put your offerings, it's not just the church, it's also the organizations doing the work on the front line, knowing that there are funds being displaced and removed and deleted that were dedicated to environmental justice issues. The other part is, again, self-awareness and educate yourself. There is many a book, many a YouTube channels out there to engage and tune in, to educate ourselves and share a link to somebody else as well, like this podcast. And the
shameless plug.
And the other part is being able to know that as a collective, that's how you're able to move mountains and make movements. That to be, I think Fannie Lou Hamer said it best when she was testifying about the importance of being that mighty fist coming together and being that unity. To know that you you can attempt to do it alone, but even my grandma Ruby did not. She gathered the neighbors, even the one with the wheelchair with the oxygen mask, and was like, are y'all coming down to City Hall to testify? And even when they all didn't, at least one did, and she became that voice as well. And so know that you don't have to have that degree. You just need to have the passion. The courage is the most important ingredient in this pot that we're cooking up for environmental change, and to know that if God is with you, no one else can be against you.
That is such a consistent. I've been hosting this show for going on 3 seasons now, or heading into our 4th very soon. And that is so consistently, regardless of what area, facet, or approach that we're taking to environmental justice, a common theme and foundation, right? That in all things, if you want to go fast, you go alone, and you want to go far, you go together. And it's about knowing your people, knowing who your people are, and even in today's society, being able to identify the people who may not look like your people, who may not seem like your people, who may not talk like your people, who may not, and being able to recognize what connects. There are certain things that connect us all. There are certain things that should be apolitical, even if they don't manifest in that way in our current social landscape. And one of those things is food, because we all need to eat. We all depend on this planet. We all, even with the different experiences that we have to access right now, those experiences are also greatly changing because resources are finite, and the necessary care is not being taken, right? And so it's so incredibly important for us, especially in a time right now where things are so polarized, things are so polarized, and it can be difficult, understandably so, to identify where to start. Like there's this like decision paralysis of like, oh well, it's flooding over here and it's flooding over here, and there's a hole here and there's a gap there, and so many people are in a position where we're in a whirlwind, right? And so much of that is by design. So much of that is with the intention of getting folks so caught up in the emotion and the whirlpool, the wave pool of it all, that we do nothing. That we, again, settle into learned helplessness and hopelessness, and that we settle into that this is just the circumstance that we must live in. But to your point, it's so incredibly important that you just do what you can.
Yeah, and I always say plant hope. Help other people every day while having optimism, perseverance, and enthusiasm on life. We need more hope and not slinging dope in our communities. And dope is doubting other people every day, including yourself. And I would say a couple of items on the agenda. Eat Lancet report. There will be in October an opportunity to engage if you're traveling in Europe on that conversation. But I'm so glad that food and environment are being connected. It's like, be a silo smasher. This is a no-brainer. When the COP29, might be 28 when it was in Dubai or whatever, make that connection between the food system and the environment. But the other most lowest tangible thing that you can do in this conversation, eat more beans, greens, and grains, people. I mean, it's not only good for the planet, is good for you if you think about it. The other part, for those who are into the GLP-1s, it really is just mimicking fiber, okay? So just eat more fibrous foods that are good for you and the planet. And so in our family, that would have been a pot of pinto beans and cornbread back home in Oklahoma. That might be the pot of greens, okay, or the kale salad, and sprinkle some black-eyed peas on it, or lentils, eat fonio, millet, semi-arid crops, and so there's so many climate smart foods in diets around the world that you can engage. But that was part of the conversation at CIA, not the national security one, but around the importance of more proteins that are plant-based, and that means eating more legumes and pulses and beans and peas is the most easiest way. And if you think about it, just think about your menu in the day, in the week. How many are you intentionally eating a bean, green, or grain? And if you do that, you're not only going to have just a healthy gut also it's about improving your colon. Colon cancer is wiping out more younger people. And if you think about the ultra refined processed foods that they're consuming more, I look at my own kids. I'm having to challenge them, like, how many more different variations of carb do you need to eat? Okay. Like, it's all carb. And I think being able to understand that basic nutrition concept of macronutrients, micronutrients, like, we have a micronutrient deficiency in this country. We have a fiber epidemic in this country. The average person is not consuming 25 grams that's recommended in a day. If you think about just a pack of bread, a slice, barely a gram of fiber. So if you're thinking about, I'm eating 3 meals a day, might eat a snack, I swear you're probably not barely getting 5 to 10 grams in a day. And so that compounds like interest over time. And over time, that leads into poor health outcomes and clogged, guts and butts.
All the pipes are stopped up.
Exactly.
Okay, we're coming close to the end of another, on that note, we're coming close to the end of another episode.
And drink more water.
Drink your water, everybody. We're coming close to the end of another episode, and we always like to end on a positive note or a call to action, some of which you've already given.
I really did.
Find your community. But, if there's anything, if they missed the rest of it, which I always say I hope you didn't, but if they missed the rest, what's one thing you want folks to leave with today?
Eat more beans and greens and grains and drink more water, and please not out of a plastic bottle. Just boil the water, people, and just have a glass filter pour and just store away. Like, that's what I do. Like, there's so much thing floating in that water bottle that you think is better. It's not. Just buy a stainless steel bottle, fill it up with water, boil your water, keep it pushing. Like, seriously, if I can just get you to get more fiber and water, you're doing the world a great. You will help the planet that way.
That's good. And with that, we want to say thank you all so much. Thank you, Tambra, for joining us today.
And go to IamWanda.org.
Shameless plug. Please go to IamWanda.org. Thank you for joining us here, and we'll see you back again next month for another episode of The Green Agenda. Bye.
Bye.